So I hate to spoil all the bad news headlines, Robert, because you know what?
Well, spoil them. Go ahead, spoil them.
Okay, so it got slightly better to buy a home here in Canada. Did you know that?
Fantastic.
Yeah, so
Oh, fantastic. Better is always better, isn't it?
well, we're going to figure that out and why this makes sense. And this episode of Real Estate Chat with
John de Perez.
and Robert Eid, we're going to dive into a report from RBC that Robert has sent me. Robert Hogue, Robert Eid sent me this report, not Robert Hogue. Robert Hogue entitled Second Quarter Affordability Gain. Well, you know what? Too small, actually, to relieve tension. So I thought it was going to be good news, but you know what? It's
No,
not
the
so.
gain is good, but the too small it makes it small potatoes.
Exactly. So we're going to look at why, and there's a link in the description. If you're watching this, make sure you click subscribe. The Housing Affordability Report, we're going to decipher this later on too. A lot of juicy stuff in there that Robert's going to share with us. But basically, a few key points. The burden of home ownership costs got slightly lighter in the second quarter in Canada. Basically, the report says something along the lines of because income has actually increased, I guess, across the board, it's become a little bit lighter to get into home ownership costs. However, they kind of step down and say that burden remains extremely heavy overall. So despite the fact that it got slightly lighter for home ownership costs, it's still a very heavy burden across Vancouver, Victoria, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Halifax, and are still near all worst time levels. So when you click on this report, you're going to see a whole bunch of different things. RBC housing affordability measures across Canada. You see a big mountain here, basically saying that ownership costs as percentage of median household income, single detached homes sitting at 66%, aggregate, which is a combination of all types, 59.8. Aggregate long-term average is sitting at 41, and condos is 43%. So condos still remain affordable. Income gain takes some of this thing out. So the share of income a household would need to cover ownership costs in percentage, Robert, 79.6% in Toronto and as high as 97.5% in Vancouver. Like, where is everybody getting all this money from? And basically, the near-term outlook is likely to disappoint because of the current environment that we're in. Here, one more thing, and I'll let Robert have at it. Affordability likely to get worse before improving. Ownership costs as a percentage of household income, Canada-wide, composite of all housing categories. So this is the projection, but forget about that. We're not there yet. In October 2023, we're looking at a percentage of household income forecasted at 62.2%. And then because I guess everybody's predicting the interest rates to drop eventually, and for those naysayers, make sure you click into the comments. We'd love to get that discussion rolling. Eventually, it'll plop back down to 54.8%, making it a little bit more affordable. Again, Robert, I'm going to load this chart up later on, but before we get to this part of things, what's your take on this report?
Well, he's only got so much to work with. And he's got a median income. He's got the Canada-wide average price based on an aggregate composite benchmark house price index. And he's got to try and do something with that. Now, you cannot seasonally adjust real estate prices because it's too local to do that. And the aggregate does not indicate anything. The mix changes every single month. Now, he's got to do something. He's got to monitor something. So that's what he's monitoring. Now, the other thing about that index washing, comparing it to a median income. Now, a median income in, let's say, Metro Toronto, the census agglomeration, Toronto and around, the bottom 40% of that population doesn't make enough money to do anything except for be on civic assistance. So they should not be included. The ratio is all out of whack. However, if you measure it all the time, you'll see it. Now, affordability, 79%. Nobody can afford 79% of their income going to shelter. Nobody can. But that means that you're including in the calculation the income of this 40% that should not be included. Now, can you exclude them? No, it's not. But if you want to address affordability, you either have to bring down the prices. Now, there's a certain percentage of the population who owns real property that will not favor that solution. drop the interest rates, and there's a certain percentage of the population that says, yeah, we could do that. I could have lower payments, no problem, no problem, no problem. But there's a certain control element that says, no, we got to break the back of inflation, so we got to keep those rates up. So that's not going to happen. And then the other thing is incomes, where the income can go up, though they just raise the ridiculously low, but too high wage for part-time and whatever they call that, basic wage.
Minimum wage. Minimum wage. Huh?
Minimum wage and students and blah, blah, blah. So unless the average income goes up by like 20%, nothing's going to happen to affordability. Unless prices come down by 20%, nothing's going to happen to affordability. And if interest rates come down 2%, nothing's going to happen to affordability. All this nonsense about taking the 15% GST off and taking this change and building in the green belt, any of these solutions are not going to do a darn thing. Our dear sweet mayor agreed with some other not quite arm's length organization that the city would give this organization the money to buy an old beat up apartment building one on Keele Street, sort of opposite Downs. That may have some upside future. Or one at Hotspur, which is Bathurst Street, south of the 401. Now these are beat up old apartment buildings, and so now they've discovered they've got 23 new units. 23 new units. I'm not exactly saying how much they spent on it, but who cares about 23 units? What are you doing to address interest rates, prices, and incomes?
Oh, so this gargantuan amount is kind of scarier than it actually is, because this is not based on median incomes of actual homeowners. It's about median incomes of all Canadians.
Well, yeah, and they're going municipality by municipality, Toronto, Edmonton, and everything like that. So, the census breaks them down that way. And so, this fellow's got a very tough job. He's got to make sense of things that don't make sense. So he's got to find a trend, and then he can look at variations from the trend. But we can't get too worked up about it. But I think he's made some very sensible assessments that
the only
slightly higher and too small to relieve tensions, which I guess I went on a rant about saying it's small potatoes. So we agreed.
Well, 97% of income on Vancouver housing. What's the rest of that 3% left for you to spend?
Okay, well, this is the whole hoax that's going on in Vancouver. Vancouver is an immigration game. People with cash, US dollars that they're smuggling in to Canada, switching it into Canadian funds, so they're gaining 30% right off the bat, are buying all cash. They don't need a mortgage. They don't have any income. They still count it in the calculations. So they're paying all cash for $4 million places that maybe they're occupying, maybe their daughter is, who knows what. But that's what's keeping the price up there, and that's what's keeping the average income down too, because they're not working. It's a game to scam the Canadian government. I mean, you, Canadian government, you and me, that's being represented by the Canadian government, who's not paying attention to what they're doing there. It's an immigration scam.
Allegedly. Let's look at the report. And Robert, you wanted to point out the numbers here when it comes to the calculation of a balanced market, buyer-seller market, especially in Toronto, where we're still sitting on what seems to be, we're sitting on what's going to be a buyer's market here.
Well, I don't think anyone would say anything other than it's a buyer's market. And the numbers, if we use these calculations, which I'm sure he's taken the numbers that have come from Korea on the number of new listings and the number of sales, and divided and got a ratio. And some of us use 45, some of us use 40, some of us use 65, some of us use 60, but it's all about the same. You can see the trend that we're right down up against buyer's market. Now that's if you count everything twice, or let's say 30% of the listings you count twice. So the numbers are skewed. He doesn't know that. I brought it to his attention. I brought it to everybody's attention, but they're ignoring it right now, that as if the strategy of terminating a listing after 9 days or 19 days, certainly within the currency of the original listing, and putting it through the system again, counts again as a new listing. Now, it is a new promotional item. It is new strategy, but it's not a new listing. It's the same old thing that nobody wanted 10 days ago.
So it's inflating numbers, and it's causing, it's a bit more amplified than it is. It should be a little bit more in the middle of the balance. But let's look at places such as what we've mentioned in previous episodes of Real Estate Chat: Calgary, Edmonton, maybe Vancouver to a certain extent, but let's not go there.
Well, Calgary is seller's market. How come? Because nobody's putting their house up for sale because it's worth more every day. We saw that in Toronto. There was not enough inventory. So it's the same thing. It's the ratio.
So
Yeah.
for real estate chat viewers, I guess it's a matter of shifting your strategy. If you're in the real estate investment game, maybe looking into places where there is still an active market. Mind you, if you enter these markets, it's going to be very, very competitive. Robert, advice for anybody looking into spending a huge amount of their income in terms of housing these days because of where the interest rates lie, how much home prices still are, despite the fact that interest rates have already risen. Should somebody buy more home than they can afford, or should they be smart about their purchasing decision?
Well, the bank's not going to let them do that. And whoever's going to be your lender is not going to let you do that unless you're buying from the owner and he's going to do the financing. If you're going to get what they call a vendor take back, vendor says, okay, you give me 20% and I'll take the mortgage for the rest of it. And instead of charging you 5.5%, I'm going to charge you 3.5%. And you don't have to qualify. You just have to give me that fairly good substantial down payment and I'll carry it. Sort of like a conditional sales contract if you're buying, appliances or something or other. But this is secured by real estate, and all the laws of Ontario favor the lender. So he has a very good chance of, if you blow up, if you don't pay, you get his property back. He's got your money, and it takes the whole thing back again. So vendor take back. Now, if you've got half down, you're not going to go for any monkey business. You might take something at a little bit of a reduced rate, but you also want something off the price because affordability means monthly payment, but it also means price. Because if you're buying on the decline, then you want to buy slightly less than what you can buy around the corner. So it's a great time to buy, but it's a time to bargain. And it's a time to talk about timing, price, financing, the value of the extras, and how bad does the seller want to sell, and how bad do you have to buy? How much time?
There you go. This is what buyers have been wanting for. So now is not the time for you as a buyer to sit on the fence.
No,
Don't
jump in,
be
aggressive. Yeah,
jump in a smart way. So make sure you negotiate and make sure the terms are right for you. Make sure it's the house that you want, and make sure that the budget works for you as well. And also think long term, because this is not something you're going to flip a year, 2 years later. This is going to be 5, 10, 15, maybe your forever
so
home.
this is for someone who's going to live there for 10 years, 7 years at least, and someone who's also going to buy something as an investment that they will hold while this whole transformation of zoning takes place, and that land is going to be more valuable because it can be turned into more units than it currently
That's right.
is available to do.
Not for speculators. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Real Estate Chat. Make sure you subscribe, click like, type into the comments what you think about this, and we'll see you in our next episode. Take care and bye for now.
Goodbye for now.